Welcome to Starbound, where every star tells a story. Have you ever wondered what lies in the eerie silence of a ruined human outpost? Let's get into the story. The silence of the ruined human outpost was louder than any explosion. First Officer Varric, his scales prickling with apprehension, surveyed the wreckage of the abandoned colony. Once thought a dead end for a pathetic, self-sabotaging species, this site now pulsed with a ghostly energy. Shattered buildings hinted at unseen technologies. The ground was scorched as though from unfamiliar weapons fire, and a strange tang lingered in the air. Ozone, perhaps, mixed with something distinctly organic and disconcertingly potent. Something happened here, he transmitted to the Dret cruiser orbiting above. Something new. Varric prided himself on his understanding of the lesser species that dotted the galaxy. His kind, the reptilian Dret, had been starfaring for millennia, rational, precise, methodical. Species like humans were blips in the Dret timeline, fiery flashes extinguished as quickly as they sparked. Prone to disease, self-destructive, and hampered by bafflingly short lifespans, humans were interesting only as cautionary evolutionary tales. "We underestimated them," came the reply from his commander, a hint of concern cutting through the usual stoicism of Dret communication. "Proceed with extreme caution. Full analysis team will arrive within the rotation." Varric hissed in frustration and suppressed a shudder. They were light years from the nearest Dret outpost, investigating a routine anomaly at the fringes of known space. Now this routine mission filled him with a primitive unease he'd never felt before. "Understood, Commander," he acknowledged. He gestured to his team. "Let's make sense of this chaos, slowly and carefully. Remember, whatever the humans were, they may be something else now." Night fell on the ravaged human outpost, casting long shadows that danced with the flickering lights of the Dret scanners. Inside their command tent, First Officer Varric rubbed tired scales along his brow ridges. Reports crackled over the comms, traces of accelerated cellular regeneration, evidence of genetic modification. It was impossible. Every report only deepened the gnawing sense of wrongness hanging over the investigation. Across a simple field table, a soft thud drew his attention. His life-mate, Kurum, had unfurled a scroll. A soft bioluminescent glow illuminated the intricate diagrams, depictions of human anatomy, historical gene sequences, and alterations. They were unlike anything she'd seen among the countless species she'd studied. "Yokan," she addressed her husband respectfully, her tail twitching ever so slightly, a sign of deep agitation under her usual composed demeanor. "This is unprecedented." Yokan, hunched over a separate dataset, lifted his heavy-lidded eyes to hers. A renowned xenohistorian, he usually took a detached view of his subjects, yet even he couldn't hide the unease in his voice. The humans were already an anomaly, with their chaotic, unpredictable evolutionary path. Now, it's a leap, not a gradual adaptation. It's as if they took their greatest flaws and, Kurum paused, searching for the right word, overwrote them. Disease resistance, extended lifespan, even dampened emotional reactivity. It's brilliant, reckless, and frankly terrifying. "You think they did this to themselves?" Yokan scoffed, yet the tightness around his jaw betrayed his uncertainty. Kurum tapped a long, dexterous claw against a specific gene sequence. There's no trace of outside interference. It's targeted, precise, and most importantly, it originates from within their existing genome. Like they've unlocked their own evolutionary potential. For centuries, the greater galactic community operated on a similar principle. Genetic modification for efficiency, for longevity, for specialization, but always within carefully calibrated boundaries. To tamper with such fundamental building blocks risked destabilization, a regression back to the brutal chaos of primordial evolution. "They always struck me as mad," Jokin mused, "but not like this. This is methodical madness." A chilling thought occurred to Kurum then. Imagine if the Dret had attempted such a radical change millennia ago. Would we have survived as a species? Would we be who we are now? They sat in silence, both lost in contemplation. Here, on the fringes of explored space, It felt as if the very foundation of galactic history had just shifted beneath their feet. News of the human transformation didn't ripple through the galaxy, it detonated. The data from the outpost spread like wildfire, leaving disbelief and escalating terror in its wake. Grand councils convened, panicked reports flooded communication channels, and age-old alliances began to strain under sudden pressures. Jokan and Kurum found themselves at the center of this tempestuous shift. The Dret, usually models of calm, methodical analysis, were split. Some pushed for immediate diplomatic contact with these new humans, advocating for treaties to curtail their potentially explosive advancements. Others, a more militaristic faction, whispered of preemptive strikes to eliminate the threat before it could fully mature. Kurum's expertise in genetic engineering was in high demand, every faction hungry for her insights that could provide an edge. Meanwhile, Jokan buried himself in human history, now framed in an entirely new context. He studied their wars, their art, their volatile politics, desperately seeking patterns and clues. This species had always been a paradox, capable of great compassion and unspeakable cruelty. Now amplified by this genetic engineering, what were they? What would they do with this unimaginable power? One evening, amidst the whirlwind of reports and consultations, Kurum found Jokan poring over ancient human texts. His quarters, usually ordered and austere, were littered with flimsy paper books and projections of archaic battlefields. "Jokan," she began cautiously, "we can't afford distractions. We need to understand their present, not dwell on their past." He turned, eyes unusually bright in the dim light. "Their past is precisely the key, Kurum. We assume all species follow a linear, logical course when it comes to progress. The humans never did. Look." He gestured at a projection of an archaic soldier, bloodied and battered, yet defiantly holding a tattered flag. They fight with illogical ferocity, value self-sacrifice, idealize concepts like honor. It makes no sense from a survival standpoint, but perhaps now that they've shed their biological limitations, these traits will be amplified, not erased. Kurum's scales twitched, a ripple of unease running down her spine. "You suggest they will remain irrational, even after their modifications?" "Not irrational," Jokan clarified, "but driven by more than pure logic. They might become something new altogether, disciplined, focused, driven, and still fundamentally unpredictable." A shared silence hung between them. The implications were enormous. If most species were bound by predictable calculations of cost-benefit and self-preservation, humans might break free of those constraints entirely. They could become a force driven by unquantifiable motivations, immune to traditional negotiation and deterrence. Kurum shivered, a rare display of vulnerability. "We have always prided ourselves on our genetic stability, Jokan. Our strength lies in our carefully moderated evolution. What you're describing, it sounds like the very chaos we've spent our lives studying in order to avoid." Months turned into a blur of data streams, diplomatic overtures, and escalating reports of human activity. Kurum became an unwilling figurehead for the Dret's genetic research efforts, pressured to decipher the secrets of the human transformation. Were there weaknesses to exploit? Could it be replicated for the Dret? Every failed experiment, every theoretical dead end only heightened the tension squeezing her civilization. Meanwhile, Jokan found himself an outlier. His warnings of an unpredictable evolutionary leap were largely dismissed. Most clung to the belief that the humans could be reasoned with, negotiated with, and if necessary, contained. The Dret prided themselves on their superior intellect, and thus the ability to calculate and outsmart any threat. Yet, news from human space painted an increasingly unsettling portrait. Their technological advancement was meteoric, their diplomacy veiled in confusing layers of ancient poetry and outdated philosophical references. There were even reports of humans reaching out to lesser species, long ignored or exploited by the galactic powers, offering aid and a strange promise of equality. One afternoon, amidst the controlled chaos of her lab, Kurum received a summons to the Supreme Council. She smoothed down the iridescent scales on her lab coat, a pointless attempt to hide the tremors in her hands. She'd failed them. The humans were unbreakable, unreadable, and she had no answers to offer. The council chamber loomed above her, the grand dome etched with the meticulous history of the Dret, a stark contrast to the turmoil roiling within her. Before the stoic council elders, she presented her findings, emphasizing the sheer transformative potential and evolutionary instability of the human genetic shift. They have broken free of the constraints that bind our progress, she concluded, her voice barely above a whisper. We cannot predict their next step because they themselves might not yet know what they're capable of. Instead of the expected panic or calculated resolve, a ripple of what could only be described as amused contempt swept through the chamber. The Supreme Elder rose, his scales gleaming like polished bronze in the chamber's light. And what do you suggest we do, Biologist Kurum? His tone was deceptively mild. Cower in fear? Abandon logic and embrace the unknown like these? Humans? Perhaps, she began, a flicker of desperation in her voice, we should reconsider what we define as logic in the first place. A dismissive gesture silenced her. The Dret are not ruled by fear, nor will we be dictated to by a species that barely joined the galactic stage. You will redouble your efforts. Find a way to control this, or counter it. We will find a solution, as we always have. Dismissed, Kurum stumbled out, the weight of the galaxy settling upon her shoulders. Later that evening, she found Yokan in their quarters, staring at the flickering projection of a human city, a vibrant, chaotic sprawl, unlike the meticulously ordered Dret metropolises. He didn't look away as she entered. The council rejected your warnings? Worse, she whispered. They ridiculed them. The galaxy teetered on the brink of a conflict that no one seemed fully prepared for. Reports from the edges of human-controlled space were a jumbled mix of unsettling progress and surprising compassion. Humans were fortifying their borders with technology that bordered on the fantastical. Yet they also uplifted fledgling alien civilizations that other galactic powers had long ignored. Jokan was summoned by an unlikely source, a faction of the Dret military surprisingly open to his unconventional views. Within their austere command center, far from the politics of the capital, he found a grim-faced pragmatism. The others still think we can outmaneuver the humans, predict their strikes, a grizzled admiral told him bluntly. But I've seen the scout reports. They adapt faster than any species I've ever encountered. They don't follow any recognizable doctrine of war. The admiral unrolled a star chart marking recent skirmishes and interceptions along the contested edges of human space. See? Here. They retreated with minimal losses, a calculated move. Here, they fought to the last with illogical ferocity over a resource-poor asteroid. Yokan ran a clawed finger along the chaotic scattering of markers. They're testing, Admiral, learning their own capabilities. They haven't settled on a strategy because they don't need one yet. It was a chilling revelation. The military might of the Dret was founded on meticulous analysis and strategic prediction. Against a fundamentally unpredictable enemy, they were flying blind. In the weeks that followed, the human enigma only deepened. Kurum was dragged deeper into a desperate arms race within her own species, tasked to reverse engineer the human genetic breakthroughs. The work sickened her. The Dret had always prioritized meticulous refinement and stability. The humans had shattered the mold entirely. It felt like trying to contain a supernova within a thimble. One day, her lab door slid open, revealing not a fellow scientist, but Yokan. His weathered scales were dulled with worry. We've intercepted a human transmission, he said. Not about a military alliance as expected, but philosophy. His voice carried an edge of bewilderment. They're exchanging theories with a reclusive aquatic species about the nature of consciousness. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the unsettling image of their own civilization, frantically scrambling for solutions. Kurum, he whispered. They're already thinking beyond war, beyond simple conquest. They've transcended the usual galactic power play before it's even truly begun. A terrible realization dawned on Kurum then. The Dret, and likely many of the established galactic powers, were locked in an outdated mindset. They prepared for an enemy who reflected their own past aspirations. The humans were playing an entirely different game on a scale that dwarfed their petty squabbles. A sense of inevitability seeped into every corner of the galaxy. The Dret consolidated their forces, bolstering defenses and forming tentative alliances with other major powers. Yet it felt like preparing for a hurricane while knowing its path could shift whimsically with the wind. Meanwhile, a shadow war played out across the stars. Dret covert operatives, including a surprisingly adept Yokon, infiltrated human systems. Their findings were contradictory and deeply disturbing. The humans seemed just as confused about their own potential as everyone else. There were factions among them, isolationists, explorers, even those advocating for a preemptive strike against the rest of the galaxy before they themselves were threatened. Then came the tipping point. An exploratory human fleet, not an invasion force, stumbled upon a small, primitive species on the verge of self-annihilation. Instead of exploiting their weakness or simply ignoring them as most other galactic powers would have, the humans intervened. What followed wasn't a war, but a rescue operation of unprecedented scale. Human ships shielded the planet, scientists scrambled to neutralize ecological disaster, while diplomats spoke not of dominance, but of cooperation. Within a stunningly short time, this ravaged world was stabilized, and its people looked to the humans not with fear, but with awe. News of the intervention, as it came to be known, struck the Dret High Council like a meteor. The military leaders raged, predicting this to be a deceptive show of force to lure them into underestimating their enemy. Others saw it as proof the humans were too chaotic and sentimental for true galactic power. Yokon, weary from months of covert missions and witnessing the baffling complexities of human society, saw it differently. "They've outgrown us," he told Kurum one night, his voice heavy with defeat. Not technologically, not militarily, but in perspective. Kurum stared at him, a flicker of despair in her multifaceted eyes. "We've spent millennia honing ourselves, perfecting our genes and our society. Are you suggesting it was all for nothing?" "Perhaps," he admitted, a lifetime of Dret certainty crumbling within him. "Perhaps what makes us strong is also our greatest limitation. We calculate, we optimize. We cannot fathom acting without clear purpose. The humans, they adapt, they create, they destroy, then rebuild in ways even they can't fully predict." The grand irony of it all threatened to choke them both. The flawed, volatile species that the galaxy had dismissed, they had become the very thing the Dret feared most, a force of pure, unquantifiable potential. The climax came not with an explosive declaration of war, but with an eerie silence. Human vessels vanished from the disputed border regions, their communications tapering off to cryptic fragments of half-forgotten poems and archaic military codes. It was as if the galaxy held its breath, waiting for the inevitable yet unknowable blow to fall. Within the Dret Empire, a silent power shift occurred. Yokon, once a mere historian, became a vital, if unsettling, advisor. Kurum's laboratory was swamped with work, but her focus changed. No longer were they desperately seeking a counter to human genetic superiority. Now, it was about understanding the fundamental logic, or illogic, driving their decisions. Then a human signal pierced the silence. It was not a war cry nor a plea for peace, but a request, an invitation. Coordinates led to a barren, uninhabited star system on the very edge of explored space. Against the panicked protests of the military, a small Dret delegation was assembled, Yokin and Kurum reluctantly among its members. The human ship that awaited them was not a warship, but a vessel clearly designed for long-term exploration. Its commander, a woman with laughter lines etched into her modified features and a disconcertingly direct gaze, greeted them not with hostility, but with weary curiosity. "We don't want to fight you," she said simply, her words echoing in the sterile conference room. "We never did, but we had to make you understand." "Understand what?" The Dret delegates bristled, centuries of ingrained superiority straining against the sheer absurdity of the situation. Then she showed them. Recordings of the intervention flickered across the screens, but it was the raw data of intercepted human communications that truly shook them. Debates raged through human society. Should they conquer, uplift, or retreat into isolationist obscurity? Arguments were backed by philosophy pulled from their turbulent past, weighed against simulations projecting potential paths the galaxy could take. There was fear, ambition, compassion, and ruthlessness all playing out in a discordant symphony. "We terrified you," the human commander said, a touch of sad understanding in her voice. because you saw your own reflection in us. You saw what ambition, tempered by self-preservation, has always driven your species. But we've outgrown that. We're a storm-building strength without a set direction yet. And that," she smiled without any trace of malice, "scares us too." The Dret delegation returned to their homeworld not with answers, but with an impossible burden of understanding. The galaxy hung on a knife's edge. The humans could crush them, uplift them, or simply vanish into the unexplored vastness of space. But one thing was chillingly clear. The old rules of power, the predictable maneuvers of galactic politics, were obsolete. In the council chamber, now uncomfortably echoing with the weight of indecision, it was Kurum who finally broke the silence. "They are waiting," she stated, her voice echoing with the cold certainty of a scientist facing an equation with too many unknowns, waiting to see what we become in the face of their existence. Verena squinted against the filtered sunlight filtering into the council chamber. The polished iridescence of the walls, a symbol of Dret stability for millennia, now felt gaudy, almost out of step with the undercurrent of strain that hummed through their very scales. She was young by Dret standards, hatched barely 2 cycles after the intervention shook the very foundations of their galaxy. Yet here she stood, representing the first generation born into a world forever changed by the humans. "Order!" The Supreme Elder's voice boomed. His scales gleamed silver with age. He'd witnessed the rise of human power, his composure cracking with every unsettling report. Today, however, was not about the humans, at least not directly. A petition from the Rimward Coalition lay before them, a seemingly minor border dispute with a newly awakened species called the Scythi. Decades ago, this would have been settled swiftly, the Dret's superior technology and diplomatic acumen ensuring a favorable outcome. Now, every decision seemed tangled in an unseen web spun by the ever-present awareness of humanity. The Scythi are unpredictable, their technology erratic, the Coalition representative hissed. Yet, should we act too forcefully, might we not provoke unintended consequences? The unspoken word humans hung heavy in the air. Verena noted the tension in Kurum's stance. The renowned geneticist was now an elder herself, her brilliant mind burdened by the choices made in those pivotal years. Yokan was absent. His focus had shifted from grand theories of history to the gritty, on-the-ground reality of human-Dret interactions along shared borders. "We cannot live in fear of shadows," an elder from the militarist faction countered. "Our hesitation only breeds weakness." "Weakness?" Verena spoke up, her voice sharper than she expected. "Or wisdom born from near catastrophe. The humans forced us to evolve, to acknowledge the limitations of our own logic." Murmurs rippled around the chamber, a mix of quiet approval and old guard resentment. The Scythi issue was tabled, a tactical delay that solved nothing. Exiting the hallowed chamber, Verena found Kurum waiting for her. "You spoke well today," the elder said, a flicker of warmth softening her usual austerity. "And achieved nothing," Verena retorted with a touch of bitterness. "We still analyze every decision through the lens of what will the humans do, even when they're not directly involved." Kurum tilted her head, a ripple of amusement briefly running through her scales. "Perhaps," she admitted, "that is the cost of true progress. To forever see a broader horizon, even if it brings more questions than answers." Verena's world was a whirlwind of coded reports, whispers relayed through back channels and frustrating training simulations. She wasn't a soldier, but a diplomat, yet her every negotiation course now involved unpredictable variables that mirrored the humans' unquantifiable motivations. Her instructors, hardened veterans of tense border standoffs and covert observation missions, were a generation steeped in the unspoken acknowledgement of human potential. "They don't follow patterns," a grizzled commander hissed as they monitored a recent human outpost exchange program with a newly uplifted species. "They could be making true allies, or setting a trap that won't be sprung for 3 generations. You have to outthink the unthinkable, Verena." His words echoed in her mind as she moved from sterile conference halls to the vibrant chaos of the border worlds. Kurum's reports on the subtle influence of human genetic modification on neighboring species added to the unease. The very notion of what constituted natural evolution was crumbling. Was this human influence intentional, or simply an unavoidable side effect of their mere existence? One cycle, an alarming report landed on her desk. Yokan, usually the voice of caution, had intervened in a direct crackdown on a small human-led trade consortium. The humans themselves seemed barely bothered, focusing on some grand, inefficient terraforming project on a dead planet. Yet, the incident caused political tremors back on the homeworld. She confronted Yokan in a secluded garden far from prying eyes. The Astorian looked weathered, scales dulled with a weariness she hadn't seen before. Yokan, your actions... They were reckless, she accused. Even now, she had to analyze the situation as a threat, the instinctive dread response. A wry smile flickered across the elder's face. Were they? Or was I finally starting to think like them? He gestured around the quiet garden, meticulously patterned, a symbol of dread control. We cling to certainty, Verena. The humans thrive in uncertainty. They create it, then harness its chaotic energy. Perhaps it's time we learn from them. Learned what? She demanded. To embrace irrationality? Throw our hard-won stability into the abyss? No. Jokan's gaze was fixed on a blossom, its delicate petals an unexpected splash of color against the sculpted trees. We must learn to balance, to let just enough of their beautiful chaos seep into our rigid world. It may be uncomfortable, even terrifying, but it might be our only path to true survival. Survival against what? The humans weren't a looming invasion fleet, but an existential quandary made flesh. Verena left Jokan among his flowers, no answers in hand, only a disorienting sense of possibilities that made the carefully constructed path of her life feel impossibly narrow. Verena found herself propelled not just by ambition, but by a desperate need to understand this new galaxy, one where logic was a weapon but also a potential prison. She sought assignments on the outer edges, those messy intersections where dread interests clashed and mingled with human-influenced spheres. Her missions were less about dominance, more about observation, adaptation. She learned to parse coded transmissions filled with archaic Earth references, to see beyond the initial friendly overtures of human diplomats and calculate the shifting motivations 3, 4, even 5 steps ahead, not with dread precision, but with a calculated embrace of the maybe. It was exhilarating and terrifying. Verena found herself arguing not for rigid adherence to treaties, but for calculated concessions, small allowances for unexpected interpretations in trade deals. She became known as unpredictable, a flicker of human illogic infecting the normally methodical dread envoy. The old guard grumbled, but amidst the complexities of a changing galaxy, her results were undeniable. One twilight cycle in a cramped outpost bar where 6 different species uneasily shared a recycled atmosphere, she found herself cornered by none other than Kurum. The elder, who had always felt a distant, formidable figure, now leaned close, the iridescent patterns on her scales swirling faintly in the low light. You are walking a dangerous path, Verena. Kurum's voice was low, a warning only she was meant to hear. Aren't we all? Verena countered, raising a glass of the local throat-burning brew in a mocking toast. The humans changed the path. We can either stumble blindly or learn to dance on shifting ground. Kurum's eyes glittered with an almost unsettling intensity. Dance, yes, but do not lose yourself in the rhythm. We must be the anchor, even as we learn to sway. The conversation lingered in Verena's mind long after she parted with her mentor. An anchor. It implied a connection to the humans, a necessary grounding amidst their chaotic influence. But was she the anchor, or merely bait dangling on the line? Her next assignment drove that question deeper, landing her on a shared dread human research station on a newly discovered world. The humans were surprisingly cooperative, offering technology and adaptive thinking. Yet, every smile, every open exchange of data made Verena's skin prickle with the uneasy sense of being effortlessly outmaneuvered. Then again, perhaps there was no winning to be had, just a constant negotiation of an unpredictable equilibrium. The research station buzzed with a tense collaborative energy that set Verena's every scale on edge. The main project was ambitious, mapping the genome of a species whose biology defied all known evolutionary models. The humans approached it with their trademark blend of audacity and illogic, proposing theories based on hunches, pursuing dead ends with stubborn glee. The Dret scientists bristled, yet amidst the chaotic methodology were glimmers of genius. It was a lead human geneticist, a wiry woman named Dr. Acosta with laugh lines and haunted eyes, who pulled Verena aside one day. "Our logic is bound by what we know of evolution," Acosta said, the intensity of her gaze almost unnerving. "You, Dret, have a unique perspective, an understanding of stability that we lack." Verena couldn't help a flicker of wry amusement. "Stability? Our entire civilization is a controlled descent into a storm of our own making," she retorted. Yet she couldn't deny the truth in Acosta's words. For all their chaotic progress, humans hungered for something the Dret took for granted. The breakthrough came during an exhausted all-nighter, a jumbled mess of hypotheses scribbled across transparent displays and discarded food wrappers. It was Verena, drawing upon the meticulously archived Dret knowledge of evolutionary outliers, who made the connection. "They've adapted in bursts," she exclaimed, the words tumbling out, not gradually but through sudden reactive leaps triggered by environmental pressures. That explained the bizarre organism's genome, a patchwork of survival mechanisms bordering on the self-destructive. Acosta stared at the projections, her eyes widening. That fits with... She trailed off, then let out a whoop of laughter that bounced oddly off the sterile walls. "The humans. We're a damn burst adaptation, aren't we? Chaotic, self-sabotaging, and somehow we made it through." Verena joined in, the laughter bubbling up unexpectedly from a well of tension. It was a moment of strange shared triumph. Two species, polar opposites in their paths through the universe, recognizing themselves in the fractured mirror of an alien genome. The discovery made waves, hailed as a turning point in galactic biology. Yet, the unease festered in Verena's mind. The humans had become predictable in their unpredictability. Their leaps were reactive, a response to threats. What happened when the threat was stasis itself? The thought struck her with the chilling clarity of a revelation. Later, in the dim light of her personal quarters, she transmitted an encrypted message to Yokan. Her mentor's reply was cryptic as always, hinting at whispers picked up from the depths of human space, debates about deliberate stagnation, the self-imposition of limits. It was madness, the antithesis of human potential. Or was it the desperate gambit of a species finally recognizing its own destructive momentum? News of the Dret human collaborative breakthrough should have been cause for quiet satisfaction. Instead, Verena was summoned back to the Dret homeworld, not as a celebrated innovator, but as a potential liability. The Supreme Council chamber felt suffocating now, the polished iridescence of its walls a mockery of the storm raging within her mind. The Supreme Elder, withered by age, fixed her with eyes gleaming with brittle anger mixed with a desperate flicker of fear. "Your insights have become ... infected," he accused, his voice a cold hiss. "You think like them, act like them. You have strayed from the Dret path. The absurdity of it would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so dire. I learned to navigate the galaxy the humans remade," Verena retorted, surprised at the defiant edge in her own voice. "And what if they change the course again?" a militaristic elder cut in. "Their stagnation, this self-control they flirt with, could be a prelude to galactic conquest. We must regain the initiative before it's too late." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of arguments, ancient Dret stability cracking under the pressure of the unknown. Verena felt not anger, but a strange sense of pity. They were birds scrambling in panic as the sky itself changed shape. It was Kurum, voice as steady as a pulse, who silenced the chamber. "Fear is predictable. Panic is quantifiable," she said, her gaze sweeping across the assembly. "Uncertainty is the new variable, and we cannot afford to become the rigid element in the equation." Her words sparked the familiar dance of agreement and dissent, but Verena saw a shift. There was no unified Dret stance anymore, only factions teetering on a razor's edge. In the end, she was not punished, but given a chilling choice. Lead a newly formed covert contingency, tasked with observing and, if necessary, subtly influencing human development. The offer was a cage lined with poison silk. It acknowledged her unique understanding of the human threat, while seeking to control it through calculated interference. But hadn't the last attempt at control ignited this cosmic firestorm in the first place? The night before her acceptance decision, Verena found Jokon in the vast Dread archives surrounded by the weight of meticulously ordered history. "You will be their mirror," the old historian told her, his voice heavy. "Reflect back the consequences of their choices, their potential for growth and for destruction." "And if my reflection frightens them into action?" Verena countered bitterly. Jokon's weathered scales rippled with a sad smile. "Then, my student," he said softly, "perhaps you will have taught us all our most crucial lesson." Verena's new assignment took her to the vibrant, chaotic sprawl of a human-led trade hub orbiting a pulsating blue star. Her cover, ironically, was that of an outspoken Dret traditionalist bemoaning the insidious creep of human influence and advocating for cultural purity. It was a role that grated, but provided unparalleled access to the undercurrents of human society. She wasn't a spy seeking stolen data, but an anthropologist observing the most unpredictable species in the cosmos. Her quarters were a cramped, cluttered space within the Dread Embassy, filled with recordings of human debates, intercepted personal exchanges, and a dizzying array of smuggled cultural artifacts. At times, it felt like she was drowning in the sheer chaos of their existence. Yet, a strange thing happened. The humans acclimated. Her dire pronouncements were first met with a mixture of amusement and dismissive contempt. However, over time, her pointed critiques seemed to pierce their usual boisterous confidence. Whispers began. Was the rush for progress too rushed? Should there be a pause, a moment for quiet introspection? The impact was subtle, but undeniable. A proposed expansion into disputed territory was postponed after a fiery human senator argued using rhetoric echoing Verena's own warnings. Scientists on a risky terraforming project began demanding rigorous safety protocols instead of celebrating reckless innovation. It was as if Verena had become a stone dropped into the river of human progress, tiny ripples spreading in unforeseen directions. Reports of these shifts reached the Dret homeworld. The reactions were as volatile as Verena expected. Some hailed her as a genius, manipulating the humans through their own inherent uncertainty. Others hissed accusations of betrayal, arguing she'd empowered their most dangerous enemy. She was neither puppet master nor traitor, just a player in a game more vast and unpredictable than any she'd been trained for. Then came the twist. A routine transmission intercepted from a deep space human exploratory vessel sent chills down her spine. The humans had encountered a new species, reclusive, rigidly structured, startlingly similar to the Dret of a century ago. And their first instinct, their genetically ingrained fight-or-flight response, wasn't fear, but compassion. Suddenly, horrifyingly, Verena understood. The humans were not the ultimate storm. They were a catalyst, a cosmic contradiction that forced evolution upon all they encountered. Through conflict, through mirroring, through sheer overwhelming presence, they pushed others out of comfortable stagnation. Had that been their purpose all along? Her next report to the Dret wasn't about subtle manipulations, but a brutally simple assessment. "We cannot control them," she transmitted, the words a death sentence in the old Dret paradigm. "But we can choose who we become because of them. It is our choice, evolve or fade into irrelevance." The reply was silence. Days later, Verena's quarters were raided, her mission abruptly terminated. The old guard had deemed her a liability. Now a fugitive, she watched as the human uplifted species thrived, mirroring the progress the humans themselves had abandoned. For now. Verena vanished into the human-influenced sectors of the galaxy, a ghost chased by the long shadows the Dret cast. She wasn't pursued with any true intensity, whether out of apathy or an unsettling certainty that she'd serve a purpose even on the run, she didn't know. Her new life wasn't about hiding, but about witnessing the consequences of the path she'd inadvertently helped set. She moved between worlds shaped by human contact, a young, volatile species rising to galactic prominence with unnerving speed, their ambition fueled by a strange mix of fear and awe of the enigmatic humans. An ancient, isolated race jolted out of their inward focus, embracing collaboration and technological leaps out of a newfound fear of being left behind. Then, there were the whispers of the humans themselves. They were withdrawing, not from conquest, but from the grand galactic stage. Exploration shifted to meticulously cataloging, stabilizing, and even retreating from recently uplifted worlds. It was like a vast engine slowly winding down, its relentless forward churn replaced by an inward focus. Were they preparing for something, or merely tired of the cosmic chaos they had awakened? Years turned into a blurry cycle as Verena became not just an observer, but a reluctant participant in this unfolding galactic drama. Her Dret training proved unexpectedly useful. She brokered tense standoffs where her calculated neutrality echoed the human stance just enough to give pause to hot-headed rivals. She advised on the integration of human-influenced technology, seeing in its chaotic efficiency the key to keeping those ambitious younger races from devouring each other too quickly. One day, a transmission reached her. It wasn't a Dret intercept, but human, sent into the open on a frequency she'd thought long forgotten. It was Yokan's voice, aged but still holding that sharp humor she so desperately missed. "Student, your unintended lessons bear fruit. The old guard has fallen, replaced by—" He paused, and Verena could almost hear his wry smile. "Well, by something less predictable. They look to you, the one who dances on the razor's edge. They look to us all to see what we will become in this new world." The transmission cut off. Verena was adrift in the stillness that followed, not a fugitive, but perhaps the galaxy's most unlikely exile. Dret, human. Those labels felt meaningless compared to the weight of the choices ahead. She, had been catalysts, forces of change in a galaxy that desperately needed to outgrow its rigid past. The humans had shown them the way. A path of uncertainty, yes, but leading towards boundless, frightening, and thrilling possibilities. The decision came to Verena not as a flash of inspiration, but in quiet moments amidst the vibrant chaos of a newly integrated port world. Children of a dozen species played in the cobbled plaza, their laughter a discordant harmony she was only beginning to understand. She'd sent reports and warnings, but ultimately, that wasn't enough. It never had been. Her reply to Yokan was terse, devoid of sentimentality. "I'm coming home. It's time to build, not just analyze." The journey back was tense, filled with coded messages and covert transfers arranged through intermediaries she now uneasily relied upon. Yet, the Dret she returned to wasn't one ready for war, but poised on the brink of a transformation as profound and unpredictable as the human shift that had triggered it. The old guard was indeed gone, but not in a blaze of conflict. They'd simply calcified, their rigid adherence to outdated logic no longer tenable amidst the shifting galactic currents. In their place was a younger generation, forged in the crucible of the intervention, tempered by uncertainty. Verena wasn't greeted as a returning hero or hunted as a traitor, but with a mix of awe and trepidation befitting a volatile element. Yokan was waiting, his once vibrant scales now webbed with lines of age. "You understand them," he said simply, a statement, not a question. "No," she replied with the cold honesty her mentor demanded, "but I see what they make. We're not those playful children in the plaza, Yokan. Our role is to be the gardeners, prune where chaos becomes destructive, provide scaffolding before ambition leads to collapse." The Grand Council chamber had altered. Dret precision still marked its architecture, but now interspersed with open spaces, adaptive materials, visual displays designed not for past glories, but for projecting myriad what-if scenarios. Here, amidst the lingering echoes of stability, Verena and a council of unlikely allies began their impossible task. Their work wasn't about dominance, but about channeling the storm. They reached out to races teetering under the weight of too rapid advancement, offering not rigid structures, but the tools for flexible resilience. They became masters of contingency, their plans shifting, adapting with a fluidity that mimicked, in its own Dret way, the humans that had humbled them. At times, it was a thankless, grueling endeavor. Then, news would reach them, a treaty forged on the very brink of war, born not out of cold calculation, but a mutually recognized fear of uncontrolled escalation. a fledgling species thriving due to infrastructure planned decades in advance, anticipating their explosive, unpredictable rise. These were victories won not on battlefields, but in the quiet war rooms of the new Dret. One evening, exhausted, Verena found herself drawn to the vast open balcony overlooking the sprawling Dret metropolis. The lights of the city, once meticulously ordered, now rippled with organic randomness. A human trade delegation was due to arrive within the cycle, not conquerors, but partners in a tentative new galactic order. "We've become our own paradox," she murmured. A familiar presence settled beside her. "Perhaps," Kurum's voice was softer, touched with a newfound warmth. "Perhaps that is the greatest progress, student. To hold the chaos and the order within ourselves, and in doing so pave a path others might cautiously follow." They stood in silence, two Dret, forever changed, gazing out into the uncertain night. The humans remained an enigma, their withdrawal a lingering shadow. But they, all of them, were charting their own course now, the galaxy a canvas still being painted, its final image dazzling and unknowable.